Hello, everyone, and thank you for watching our informal debate on the primary use of zero-tolerance policies in schools. My name is Madeline. I am from Georgia and will introduce our claim, illustrate an example of a time zero tolerance was used, and serve as a summarizer on why zero tolerance is unethical. Nicole from Chicago will be the introducer of the counterclaim of our argument, summarize why zero tolerance is ethical, and also illustrate a time that zero tolerance was used. Shelby from Chicago will serve as a summarizer of zero tolerance, as well as an illustrator of a zero tolerance case study and researcher of school-wide positive behavior interventions and supports. And Annalisa from Colorado Springs will serve as a researcher of a restorative justice approach.
It is the responsibility of schools to protect teachers and students while also addressing inappropriate or dangerous behaviors that can affect other students. Systems have been developed to ensure the safety of all. Many schools create and develop their own program, but all of these programs revolve around strict and uncompromising rules. The idea of zero tolerance was first introduced in the military. Many people feel that punitive punishment, such as zero tolerance, works for public school systems. Zero tolerance policies are a fast-acting intervention that quickly remove difficult students and send a clear message to all students of what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior. Zero tolerance policies help with classroom management and keeping the workplace safer. Because of zero tolerance policies, convicts are less likely to reoffend because zero tolerance catches them early on in the escalating cycle of crimes. Overall, zero tolerance is a necessary and effective school-wide behavior system.
The American Psychological Association Zero Tolerance Policy Task Force describes zero tolerance as a policy that mandates the application of predetermined consequences, most often severe and punitive in nature, that are intended to be applied regardless of the gravity of behavior, mitigating circumstances, or situational context. The term zero tolerance was first used in the 1980s by President Ronald Reagan's administration when it launched its War on Drugs initiative. The Drug-Free Schools and Campuses Act of 1989 was passed and banned the unlawful use, possession, or distribution of drugs and alcohol by students and employees on school property and college campuses. The act required educational institutions to create disciplinary actions for violations or risk losing federal aid. In order to ensure their federal funding, a majority of educational institutions adopted the zero tolerance policy. In reaction to school shootings and a rise in violent juvenile crime, the Gun-Free Schools Act of 1994 required every state to pass a law requiring educational agencies to expel any student in possession of a gun for at least 1 year. It was the beginning of school zero tolerance policies encompassing a range of violations such as hate speech, harassment, fighting, and dress codes. It was described that zero tolerance policies assume that removing students who engage in disruptive behavior will deter others from disruption and create an improved climate for those students who remain.
In contrast to punitive punishment or zero tolerance, evidence-based data shows that positive behavior supports are more beneficial when considering a school-wide behavior system. The American Psychological Association has found that harsh practices harm academic achievement for all students, while increasing the chances that those excluded will be held back, drop out, and become involved with the juvenile and criminal justice systems. As shown in this graphic from the Advancement Project, zero tolerance discipline policies criminalize students, pushing them down the school-to-prison pipeline. Harsh discipline policies are not building safer schools, but instead double the risk of a student dropping out of school. The Advancement Project also reports that the U.S. spends almost $70 billion annually on incarceration, probation, and parole. Between 1987 and 2007, there was a 127% funding increase for incarceration, compared to a 21% increase in funding for higher education in the same 20-year span. Instead of pushing children out of school, students should be kept in school, off the streets, and offered counseling and other support aimed at changing behavior. Overall, studies show that focusing on prevention rather than punishment will improve student discipline, behavior, and grades.
A beneficial alternative to using zero tolerance in schools is implementing positive behavioral interventions and supports, also known as PBIS or School-Wide Positive Behavior Supports, SWPBS. PBIS is a framework for aiding school personnel in utilizing evidence-based behavioral interventions for that support positive outcomes for all students. PBIS focuses on using principles of applied behavior analysis and aims to prevent problematic behavior that would typically result in disciplinary actions and suspension. PBIS supports school staff in organizing evidence-based practices, improving the implementation of the strategies, and maximizing academic and social behavior outcomes for all students. When a school undertakes implementing PBIS, they first need to focus on 3 to 5 behavioral expectations that maintain positivity and are easily remembered. An example of these behavioral expectations is respect yourself, respect others, and respect property. It is imperative that there is consistency throughout the entire school and that there is at least 80% buy-in from staff members when applying these behavioral expectations in order for successful implementation. The PBIS team will then create a matrix of what the behavioral expectations look like, sound like, and feel like in non-classroom areas. Here is an example provided on the PBIS website. As you can see, the behavioral expectations for respect property are explained in detail. It can easily be determined what is expected within each area listed. For example, on the bus, it is expected that students will keep feet and hands where they belong, throw unwanted items in the wastebasket, and keep food and drinks in their backpacks. Teachers are given the opportunity to work with a PBIS team member to create matrices to determine what each classroom routine will look like, sound like, and feel like in terms of behavioral expectations. PBIS involves a multi-tiered system of support that consists of 3 tiers. Tier 1 involves school-wide, Tier 2 is small group, and Tier 3 is individual. Tier 1 focuses on preventing the development of new incidents or occurrences of problem behaviors by implementing high-quality learning environments for all students and staff and across all settings. Tier 2 involves reducing the frequency and intensity of incidents of problem behaviors for students who are not responsive to primary intervention practices by providing more focused, intensive, and frequent small group-oriented responses in situations where problem behavior is likely. Tier 3 deals with reducing the intensity, frequency, and complexity of existing problem behaviors that are resistant to and unlikely to be addressed by primary and secondary prevention efforts by providing most individualized responses to situations where problem behavior is likely. Here is an instance where PBIS was implemented. McNabb Elementary in Southwest Kentucky successfully implemented PBIS. Greg Ross, principal of McNabb Elementary, stated that since implementation, there have been many drastic changes within the building. PBIS is executed in every area of the school with fidelity. Teachers receive training in research-based approaches with discipline and classroom management yearly. Greg explained that each morning, the students and staff at McNabb Elementary participate in a building-wide morning assembly to remind everyone of the school expectations. In 2007, the school had 374 referrals. By June of 2012, the school had only 173 in-school discipline referrals. A growth in assessment scores was also found. Greg describes the school environment to that of a family.
Another example of a positive behavioral support is the restorative justice approach. This approach begins with an agreed-upon code of conduct describing a safe and inclusive school culture that outlines students' rights and responsibilities and requires mutual accountability among adults for the students' educational, emotional, and social well-being. This code of conduct is designed and agreed upon through collaboration of the teachers and admin, as well as the students. When students violate this code of conduct, the disciplinary decisions made require the student to own the behavior and then reflect and understand the effect the behavior had on those surrounding them. In comparison to zero tolerance, where one act can cost the student their education, a discussion about the inappropriate behavior is had, hearing both sides of the story, and then the students and adults work through the problem together, as opposed to simply giving a consequence without the student ever really having to understand why the behavior was inappropriate and what that means for them individually and the community as a whole. This process starts with what is called a restorative inquiry, a non-judgmental or accusatory discussion where the student has a chance to explain their side of the incident and then is walked through how it may have impacted people around them and also come up with ways to try and make things right with others and themselves. Similar to peer-mediated treatment methods, a major appeal for using a restorative approach to discipline as an alternative to zero-tolerance policies is the emphasis on respect, accountability, repair of harm, and restoration rather than on punishment and exclusion. Studies suggest that zero-tolerance policies have had multiple negative effects on student behaviors and are said to increase the likelihood that students will engage in future disciplinary problems, including school disengagement, noncompliance, tardiness, absence, truancy, and disrespect for authority figures in school. Punitive school discipline problems not only deprive youth of education opportunities, but also, according to the evidence, increase the likelihood of future disciplinary problems and ultimately youth contact with the criminal justice system. This graphic compares traditional practices such as zero tolerance with the restorative approaches. With a traditional approach, the focus is that school rules are broken, and the justice focuses on establishing guilt for the offender. The accountability equals punishment, and the justice is directed at the offender, and the victim is ignored. And the rules and intent outweigh whether outcome is positive or negative, and there is limited opportunity for expressing remorse or making amends. Whereas with the restorative approach, the focus is that people and relationships are harmed. The justice identifies needs and responsibilities, and taking accountability equals understanding the impact and repairing the harm caused. The offender, victim, and school all have direct roles in the justice process. And the offender is responsible for their harmful behavior, repairing the harm, and working towards positive outcomes.
Here is a story of a time when zero tolerance was ethical. At Central Academy for Excellence in Kansas City, Missouri, security officers found a .22 caliber revolver in a 10th grader's backpack during a routine check. The gun was loaded with 5 rounds and 1 spent shell casing, making it readily capable of lethal force. In defense, the student said he found the gun while walking home from school the day before, put it in his backpack, and forgot it was there. The administration used zero tolerance and expelled the student. Many parents of other students praised the school administration, thankful that no one was hurt and that the threat was promptly removed.
In this situation, zero tolerance was absolutely the right way to go. The gun was loaded and ready to be used as a weapon. No matter what the situation, a loaded gun should never enter a school. When looking at the ethics codes and principles, many were followed, making this an extremely ethical decision. First off, Ethics Code 4.03, Individualized Behavior Change Programs. This ethics code ensures that every situation is looked at individually and information and decisions are not based off previous circumstances. In this situation, the administration heard all sides of the story, before coming to the conclusion of expulsion. Also, Ethics Code 8.01, avoiding false or deceptive statements. This code ensures the behavior analyst does not give misleading, exaggerated, or fraudulent statements. The administration and public have the right to know exactly what was found and how it will be taken care of. In situations like this, information may be skewed to avoid causing panic. However, the school district in this situation did the right thing, releasing all information on the situation. Lastly, the ethics principle of do not harm. Many people feel this ethics principle only applies to the student being punished. However, if that child was not removed from school, they could have came back to school the next day and shot multiple people. Not only could the shooter have been harmed in the process, but multiple innocent classmates and teachers could have been badly injured or killed. I agree that in most situations, zero tolerance is not ethical, but in this situation, it was the right thing to do. Here is a situation that zero tolerance was not the most appropriate solution. This is a true story from a high school student in Chicago, Illinois. It all started on the first snowfall of the year. A group of friends were throwing snowballs after school let out. One snowball accidentally hit a teacher. One may have laughed it off, however, the school issued a severe consequence. The student was faced with expulsion. The student's family immediately hired a lawyer. Thankfully, the incident was caught on camera. The lawyer was able to prove that the snowball was made of light, fluffy snow and no one was hurt, therefore dismissing the expulsion case. All students involved returned to class. The lawyer in this story admitted to helping multiple students in similar situations. He said, "Far too often am I defending high school students who are being charged with severe crimes over an accident happening in school."
This snowball fight story is very alarming, and while we don't have all the details, many ethics codes and ethical principles are violated. First of all, Ethics Code 4.08, Considerations Regarding Punishment Procedures, was violated. This ethics code calls for reinforcement procedures for alternative behaviors. However, the teacher did not offer an appropriate behavior in place of a snowball fight. So if throwing snowballs is the target behavior, the teacher should implement the least restrictive procedure first to reduce the behavior, which in turn also breaks Ethics Code 4.09. In addition to ethics codes, ethical principles were also violated. Specifically, the child was denied access to education for a period of time because of the expulsion. Taking a student away from academics violates the ethical principle, do no harm. Additionally, the teacher violated the ethical principle of being just. I do not believe the punishment fits the crime in this case. There is no evidence that the student hit the teacher with a snowball on purpose. Also, the snowball fight took place 20 yards away from the teacher, so I am not sure how the teacher was certain which student threw the snowball. The teacher did not work to benefit the student, which also breaks the ethical principle of treating others with care and compassion.
Restorative justice could have been used in this situation over expulsion easily. The first thing that would need to have happened was a conversation with the individual or group that threw the snowball. The administration would need to listen to the story and understand the student side, and then walk the students through the impact throwing the snowball had on others, and steps they could take to heal the community, such as apologizing to the teacher it hit and repairing the relationship by offering assistance to the teacher with something in the classroom. A minor infraction such as this should not cost a child their education. The disciplinary action chosen does not help anyone in the situation or hold anyone accountable for their actions. It simply removes the problem and doesn't deal with it. Zero tolerance focuses on exclusion, whereas restorative justice puts the focus on community.
Another example of when zero tolerance was used involved Devon Shaw, a student from Bedford High School in Bedford, Ohio. Devon was given the task of preparing a demonstration for his 10th grade speech class. He chose to present to his class about preparing a healthy breakfast. Devon explained, "I put in the slogan, 'An apple a day keeps the doctor away,' because it was first period." He brought apples, craisins, and a knife to demonstrate how he prepares his food. He stated that when he took out the knife, his teacher told him that he couldn't use it, so he gave it to her. By the end of the school day, Devon received a suspension letter that charged him with having a weapon at school and was suspended for 5 days. Devon's mother felt that the punishment was too much and that the situation could have been used as a teachable moment, but instead he was labeled as a criminal for a harmless mistake.
This case also breaks Ethics Code 4.08, Considerations Regarding Punishment Procedures. The student brought the knife in for a demonstration, and the teacher should provide an appropriate alternative for the student to be able to cut the apple and complete the assignment. In this case, the school should consider if this was the student's first time bringing a, quote, weapon to school, and if the student had any sort of prior reprimands on the issue. The teacher should have known the scope of his demonstration prior to the day it was due. If so, the student wouldn't have been punished for trying to do an assignment, as administration would have been able to distinguish mistake from malice. Suspension is not using the least restrictive procedure, which breaks Ethics Code 4.09. The fact that Devon Shaw is African American also brings up a disturbing point that Black suspension rates are more than double white suspension rates. In fact, 40% of students expelled from U.S. schools each year are Black. Robbins 2005 reports that zero-tolerance policies reinforce these pre-existing racial and class inequalities that create these disparities.
This is another instance justice could have been used over zero tolerance. Students from school is often not viewed as a punishment by them at all, but it also does not help them understand their infractions and how it may have impacted others around them. By walking Devon through what he did and how he could have handled it differently, such as by asking the teacher if it was okay to bring a knife, or asking the teacher if they could provide the knife for him, or even hold the knife throughout the day for him, by simply punishing him for attempting to complete an assignment with no real discussion, the odds are it will reinforce more unwanted behavior. The removal of a student, again, does not interest and essentially sets them up for failure, whereas with a restorative approach, it helps them understand and take responsibility for their success, while showing that the teachers and administration are there to encourage and support that success, not threaten it. There is limited research on school-based restorative justice programs, but Armour's 2013 evaluation of preliminary research findings suggests that restorative justice can have a significant impact on redirecting the school-to-prison pipeline. The assessment of research findings in various states found that expulsions, misconduct, and violent acts decreased, school engagement and academic achievement increased, and teacher turnover was reduced. The largest study of restorative practices in school took place in Queensland, Australia. Queensland was the site of the first documented School Restorative Justice Conference, which took place in 1994 in response to a serious assault at a high school. The Queensland schools continued to conference future disciplinary violations. The majority of these conferences dealt with assaults and serious victimization. 89 conferences were conducted during the course of 2 studies, and conferencing continues today. The Queensland model is an adaptation of the family conference model, and the conferences are conducted by a trained facilitator who brings together the offender and her victim with their families, supporters, and appropriate school personnel. The facilitator poses a number of scripted questions to the offender, who explains in her words what she has done. The facilitator then directs questions to the victim, then to the victim's supporters, and finally to the offender's supporters. All parties are given a chance to tell their version of the events and their account of the harm done to them. The entire group then goes on to decide what should be done to repair the harm and how to minimize the likelihood it will happen again. The group reaches an agreement that reflects the victim's wishes, but which is negotiated until all parties are satisfied that it is fair and reflects the value of reparation instead of retribution. Agreements can also provide for future support for the offender or victim. Findings from the conference were very positive. There was a high compliance rate by the offenders with the terms of the agreement. After conferencing, a majority of offenders said they felt more accepted by other conference participants, and a majority of victims felt safer and more able to manage similar situations. All school administrators questioned in relation to the conferences felt that conferencing reinforced the school values. Nearly all schools reported they had changed their thinking from a punitive to more restorative approach.
The American Psychological Association Zero Tolerance Task Force created a few frequently asked questions. Here are two that we selected to answer.
What has been the impact, both negative and positive, of zero tolerance policies on students, families, and communities?
Good question. The research in this area varies. Some literature suggests that zero tolerance policies create or enhance mental health concerns for youth. These mental health concerns range from anxiety all the way to unhealthy relationships with adults or authority figures. Not only is this affecting the students, but the family bonds as well. Zero tolerance is causing children to resent their parents as authority figures and lose respect for them. Research has also found that suspension and expulsion for school misbehavior is not cost-effective for the community. Paying welfare and prison costs for the undereducated and alienated youth is money that could be put to much better use. More research needs to be conducted on the benefits of zero tolerance in these areas.
Thanks for answering, Nicole. Another question is, to what extent are zero tolerance policies developmentally appropriate as a psychological intervention, taking into account the developmental level of children and youth?
Through research, the Zero Tolerance Task Force found that before the age of 15, adolescents displayed immaturity in the areas of poor resistance to peer influence, attitudes toward and perception of risk, future orientation, and impulse control. It was also found that many secondary schools do not fully comprehend the challenges that adolescents experience developmentally regarding peer relationships, autonomy, support from adults, identity negotiation, and academic self-efficacy. The use of zero tolerance inappropriately may worsen the situation already at play, involving the typical challenges of adolescence on top of the possibility of a biased secondary school. Because adolescents may act as a result of developmental or neurological immaturity, it is imperative to decipher whether the consequences are worth the long-term negative consequences of zero tolerance, especially if the resulting behavior did not pose a threat to safety.
Some people feel punitive punishment or zero tolerance works as a school-wide behavior system. The Navy first used zero tolerance in 1983 with submarine crewmen who were suspected of drug abuse, and the policies were transferred to school districts across the country about 10 years later. Zero tolerance policies are necessary to maintain safe schools, especially when it comes to weapons and drug offenses. However, we just provided many examples of when zero tolerance is not appropriate and will do more harm than good. Positive behavior supports are more beneficial than zero tolerance when considering a school-wide behavior system. School-wide positive behavior supports that is grounded in systematic approach, effective instruction, prevention, and data-based decision-making leads to a decrease in disruptive student behavior and the resulting punitive disciplinary actions such as suspension and expulsion.
In closing, there is absolutely no scientific evidence showing benefits of zero tolerance. Instead, replacing an outdated punitive punishment system with an evidence-based positive support system would lead to lower suspension and expulsion rates and more social, emotional, and academic success for students. We hope you enjoyed our informal debate on zero tolerance. Thanks for joining us.